The Sunday Baroque podcast is made possible by WSHU and the Friends of Sunday Baroque. You can find out more about the Friends of Sunday Baroque and find out how to become one yourself by visiting our website, sundaybaroque.org, under the Contact tab. Stefani Matsuo is a violinist. In September 2019, she was appointed Concertmaster of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, which also performs and records as the Cincinnati Pops. The North Carolina-born musician has degrees from the Cleveland Institute of Music and the Juilliard School. And along the way, the award-winning violinist has also been a first violinist in the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, a soloist in New York and Washington, D.C., and a busy chamber musician. Stefani Matsuo joins me to talk about her passion for music and her career path. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. When did you start making music? How old were you? Was it in school? Did you come from a musical family? And did you start first on the violin?
Yes, I started on violin. I was about 1 year old.
Whoa.
So I think to be exact, 15 months or so.
Wow.
My mother is a Suzuki violin teacher. So she had students coming over to the house prior to when I was born, the whole time she was pregnant with me. And then basically I would see these people coming and I thought everybody must play violin. That's just normal. So I begged her for a violin.
Wow.
And once she gave me a toy one to begin with, one of the plastic ones. There's sound comes out if you put the bow on a certain place on the instrument, and it worked for a couple of weeks, and then I wanted a real one. I figured out that if I did things differently, it didn't change the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or whatever song was coming out of the violin. So I begged her for a real one, and then she finally gave me a real one, and then supposedly I didn't want to let it out of my sight ever. Oh. So after that, she was my first teacher, and I studied with her full time until I was about 12. And then I started going to another teacher after that. But she was still my practice coach at home. So.
Sure. Wow. So your first, 11 years or whatever were as a Suzuki student.
Correct.
Wow. Interesting. What's that like? I mean, obviously there's certainly a history and a tradition of learning from one's parent. The Bachs did it if it was good enough for them. But
right.
Are there any special challenges of having your mom as your primary solo teacher, personal teacher?
I think so. I mean, obviously, there's that comfort level that's that's a little more extreme than if you're going to a teacher that you only know as your teacher. So I think that's part of the reason probably why my mom decided at the preteen years of 12 years old, maybe you should go to somebody else, give us that little bit of space. Because as many people know, preteen girls are not the easiest people to deal with.
No.
Especially as a violin student where my mom and I would start butting heads a little bit, but I mean, she would, like I said, she would still help me practice at home if I asked for help. But that was the key thing, was that I had to ask for help at that point.
Smart woman.
Correct.
So, wow. So at this point, though, you must have clearly had a real obvious gift and interest at this point if you'd been studying with your mom for 11 years. And, clearly she would know. So what was that process of, finding you that next teacher? And where were you sort of in your path as a musician?
Well, at that point, my family had just moved. I was born in the Pinehurst area in North Carolina, and my parents had just moved to Greensboro, which is about 45 minutes from North Carolina School of the Arts. So I had come into contact through some local competitions with a teacher named Sarah Johnson, who was a teacher at North Carolina School of the Arts. And she and my mom had started talking, and I had a couple of trial lessons with her. And my mom and I felt like it was a great match to kind of develop my playing to the next level that it needed to be developed. So I started studying with her privately around 12 years old. And then after that, I ended up going to School of the Arts for 8th grade through high school years.
Wow. So you've had really some pretty intense relationships with teachers and mentors pretty young. What are the things that stand out in your memory about the work that you did with those teachers and those special mentors at that turning point in your career?
Well, I think each teacher kind of brings a different development to your playing. So I think working with my first full-time teacher, other than my mother, was kind of a development of learning from somebody outside of family. So that was a big thing. And she ended up becoming kind of a second mother to me. We still keep in touch, and she helped me just explore a lot of sound colors and things like that, just bringing my playing away from just, the fundamentals, and then kind of exploring more musical ideas as well. And then after that, my other teachers were in college. So Paul Cantor was in Cleveland Institute of Music, and Sylvia Rosenberg was at Juilliard. And both of them, I think, helped me to... Paul Cantor, I think, really developed my sound. And Sylvia Rosenberg reinforced and solidified the playing and bringing everything together, I think, after individual things were kind of developed on their own. So.
So at what point, do you remember when and how you really realized sort of in your heart of hearts that music would be your life's work? Do you remember that?
I don't know if it was a specific instance. My mother also plays in a local orchestra called Greensboro Symphony Orchestra. So I had the fortune of seeing great guest artists and conductors come to Greensboro. So I would see this and think, is that something I would be able to do? Is that something I would be fortunate enough to do, to be able to have music as my profession? And so it was something I knew I wanted, but I didn't know what path in music it would take. So I feel incredibly fortunate to have ended up here in the orchestra.
Yeah. So you're the concertmaster of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. So what does a concertmaster do? I don't think everybody really realizes it. I mean, it's a very important position within an orchestra, and you have some very particular responsibilities.
Yes. Well, the concertmaster, first of all, is the leader of the first violin section, first and foremost, and then also the leader of the string section, so coordinating with the principals of other string sections. And then is also kind of the link between a conductor and the rest of the orchestra. So if that means kind of translating something into a technique or ensemble, that's my job to kind of coordinate with the orchestra, especially in the case of, for example, a guest conductor where the orchestra is not so familiar with the person, whether it's rehearsal style or something, a performance technique, something like that. So I coordinate ensemble, I coordinate maybe questions that people might have between sections or with the conductor. I also coordinate bowings for the string section, which is a big part of the job. So it's kind of a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So you have a lot more responsibilities than just like any member of the violin section. And what other skills do you think a person needs to be a successful concertmaster?
I think somebody has to obviously be prepared at all times, but that's every member of an orchestra. Right. So you have that personal preparation of knowing your part, but leading a section and leading the orchestra, you also have to be aware of other sections' parts as well. So being aware of what's going on in other parts of the orchestra to listen out for, maybe ensemble issues that might arise. And then personality-wise, I think somebody has to be not necessarily in control all the time. It can't be a control freak or anything, but they have to be able to be stern but easygoing at the same time, if that makes sense. Right. To deal with, there are a lot of different personalities in an orchestra, but also with guests, and making everybody feel comfortable to make the best music possible is very important, I think.
Mm-hmm. So it seems, I mean, you're very young.
Yes.
And you're a woman, and I'm wondering whether those are common traits for a concertmaster. Are there a lot of women concertmasters? Are there a lot of people who become a concertmaster as young as you are?
Age and gender are becoming more diverse, I think, as the music industry is developing, thank goodness. Auditions these days are mostly done behind a screen. So the committee has no idea if somebody's a man or a woman, how old they are, where they studied, anything. So it's, I think, a blessing nowadays. Some people are still shocked outside of the music world when they see, a woman in charge or a young person in charge. But I think once somebody proves themselves, then people are accepting. People in the music world definitely are accepting. And we're starting to see a lot more women in these leadership positions. There's a female concertmaster of National Symphony in Washington, D.C., in Utah Symphony, and in Houston as well. So, and all relatively young concertmasters as well, in their 30s and 40s. So I'm glad it's starting to become more of the norm nowadays.
Okay. So your husband is also a member of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. So what's it like working with your spouse? And also, how did you meet?
We met at the Juilliard School at a chamber music reading. That sounds really nerdy. A friend of ours had set up a reading with friends and checked out a whole stack of music from the library, and we just both happened to be there. And then we both moved to the Midwest. He was starting in Cincinnati in 2014, and I was playing in Indianapolis Symphony for that year. And so he was actually commuting from Indianapolis to Cincinnati for the year.
Wow.
And the Cincinnati violin audition happened 1 month after I started in Indianapolis. So I knew there was a possibility that I could take it. There was a job opening, but I just wasn't sure if I would be fortunate enough to advance in the audition or anything. And then luckily I won that audition. So 1 month into living in Indianapolis, he knew there was going to be an end to the 2-hour one-way commute.
Gosh.
But we feel incredibly fortunate to have ended up in the same orchestra.
Yeah, and a wonderful orchestra it
is.
Yes. So you do chamber music. You still do chamber music with your husband. And chamber music in general is still a very important part of your performing life. What is that like? How is playing chamber music different from playing in an orchestra?
In a lot of ways, it's incredibly similar. You have to communicate with the other musicians, allow people to be free with their expression and adapt to that. It's just on a much smaller scale and a much more exposed scale in the case of a string player. So it sometimes feels a little bit more nerve-wracking in some ways to play chamber music, but it's so fun, and it's such a great experience always to be able to play chamber music with colleagues in the orchestra, because everybody that I have had the experience of playing with loves playing chamber music. So it's very fortunate that we have musicians that love to play in orchestra and chamber music.
Yeah. So I've had the great fortune to see you and hear you play a number of times with the orchestra, and I have to say, you exude confidence and exuberance and just real joy in your playing.
Thank you.
Are you nervous under that veneer, or you seem very confident? And I'm curious to know too whether or not you get nervous yourself, or you've ever been nervous. Like, do you have any suggestions for someone who might be a player that experiences nerves?
I think everybody gets nervous a little bit, whether or not they want to admit it to themselves or not. I think it's normal to get a little bit anxious, especially, if it's a piece you haven't necessarily performed before, or if there's a big solo. But I think the anxiety is more, in my case, of an excitement. Obviously, for auditions, things like that, I get nervous. it's never a great feeling to stand by yourself on a stage and play an excerpt from an orchestral work when you would much rather be playing with 80 other people. But I think, for me at least, with nerves, the more you perform, the more you put yourself in uncomfortable situations, the easier it gets. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do all the tricks, bananas, and I like to jog to kind of get out some of my anxiety. I think for me, at least, it helps get a little bit of the adrenaline out if I go on a jog before a concert, or not right before coming to the hall or anything. So I'm super tired, but earlier in the day to get some of the extra energy out of my system. And then it's always just nice on the stage to be surrounded, like I said, by your colleagues. That's always a comfort to know everybody up there is in the same situation. Yeah. But in my case, I think auditions are the most nerve-wracking. So the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Good advice. So you actually raised a really good point. There's a lot of physicality. I mean, you have to have stamina. You just came off a very grueling 6-hour Beethoven event with the symphony. How do you do that? How do you keep your physical health and strength up to support your playing?
I think, well, I mentioned jogging already. That's something that I like to do to help with stamina, but also kind of clear my head. Sometimes I'll turn on music. Sometimes I'll just watch mindless television while I'm jogging. Just run outside, get fresh air. Anything to kind of get away from the instrument a little bit. And then also just stretching, taking breaks when you're practicing. I like to do a little bit of Pilates, things like that, so that you strengthen your back a little bit. A lot of orchestral musicians, because you're sitting in one position for an extended period of time, not necessarily in a natural position, people tend to have fatigue in their back or their shoulders. So just keeping that strength and flexibility. And I think in performances, not being afraid to move to release some of the tension that can appear in your back from just sitting in one position for hours at a time.
Sure. So what do you like to do besides playing the violin? Do you have other fun hobbies or things that have nothing to do with music?
Yeah, I like exercise, first of all. I think it's important release. But I also enjoy cooking. My husband and I enjoy trying new recipes and experimenting with different cuisines. So we enjoy doing that. I also am studying Japanese to talk to my husband's side of the family a little more. So I like to do all of these things to kind of take a break from from practicing, which is important, I think.
Absolutely. So you mentioned maybe listening to music when you're exercising. Is it classical music, or do you have other kinds of music you like to listen to?
Sometimes it's classical. Sometimes it can be anything. It can be jazz. It can be pop. It can be rap. It can be anything. I mean, I love listening to all kinds of music. Just depends on my mood. And also, sometimes I listen to things that I'm preparing classically. But sometimes if I need a little bit of a mental break, then I'll listen to other kinds of music as well.
Now, you've just reminded me there are so many really iconic, particularly violinists through history, and people who were alive today as well. Do you have any sort of, are you fangirl for any particular violinist?
Oh my gosh. Well, not living anymore, I think holy grail of sound. I love listening to Oistrakh recordings. His sound was just unbelievable, just the richness of sound that he got. I probably have listened to all of his recordings that I'm aware of. And alive today, I mean, I love when, for example, when Gil Shaham comes, because his playing is outstanding, but he's probably the nicest human being I've ever met. He's just so humble, and just you can tell that he loves making music. And it's always such a joy for the orchestra when he's here. He just brings joy and light to the stage. So I'm a huge fan of his.
Nice. Real warmth. You're
Yes.
right. I saw that concert you guys just did. You're right. So you've worked really hard, and you've had these amazing and well-deserved accomplishments now to your credit, and yet you're also still growing as a musician and as a professional. So do you have a wish list? What kind of other goals, what kind of dreams do you have for yourself as a musician?
Oh my gosh. I think I would love to continue getting opportunities to perform with colleagues here, chamber music performances. It's great to perform chamber music also with guest artists when they come to town. That's always a joy for all of us. But in terms of development and things like that, I just love to kind of push my limits and keep developing my playing. I'm always looking up, again, I'm going to sound really nerdy by saying this, but I'm constantly, reading books on violin playing and on, books about composers and music making, just to see how other people's brains work when they're performing or when they're composing. And so I just hope to keep developing my playing, and I'm enjoying challenging myself in this new role.
Yeah. Your mom must be amazingly proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
So I've been speaking with Stefani Matsuo, violinist and concertmaster of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, about her amazing, successful career and her beautiful artistry. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.